Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our work session. The mayor is absent and excused from this meeting. She'll be joining us at 1 o'clock. We have one item on our agenda. It is the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program, an update on our disparity study implementation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. My name is Lakeisha Shaw. I am the MWBE Program Manager, Department of Equity and Inclusion. I am joined by Miller 3 Consulting, who you'll hear from here shortly, to provide a brief recap of the disparity study. We're here before you today to provide a post-disparity study actions update, really focusing on the details of the 2-year strategy for implementing the disparity study recommendations. Today, again, we're going to provide a recap of the disparity study findings. We're going to talk a little bit about key actions and progress for 2024, and then details of the 2-year implementation strategy. So to provide a little information about the City of Raleigh's MWBE program for context, the program focuses on increasing opportunities for historically underutilized businesses and promotes diversity and inclusion in city contracting. We as a city have a current goal of 15% of the total contract amount to be performed by MWBE businesses for construction and repair contracts of $300,000 or more, or $100,000 or more that includes any state funding. So currently as a city, we do not have MWBE goals for our professional services, general services, and goods and supplies. Wanted to provide a little definition as to what is a historically underutilized business. Per state statute, the business has to be 51% or more owned and managed daily by individuals in the following hub categories. So the racial minorities are Black, Hispanic, Asian American, American Indian. Female is recognized as a hub business, disabled, and disadvantaged as well. Firms must be hub certified for their participation to count towards hub spending and participation. We as a city, we recognize the North Carolina Department of Administration's hub or historically underutilized business certification program, as well as the North Carolina Department of Transportation's DBE or Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. So the projects that you see come for contract award, the firms would have been either hub or DBE certified. Wanted to provide a little information about the city's current efforts related to the LGBTQIA+ business community. While this is a business community that is currently not certified per statute, we wanted to provide some information related to the current efforts the city has taken to support this business community. So there is a longstanding partnership with Harmony, North Carolina LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce. There is a mission to foster opportunities for LGBTQ businesses, professionals, and allies. So the small business development team does regularly partner and support, and also sponsors a couple of their events annually. Harmony is also an exhibitor at the annual MWBE Expo. The MWBE team presented our 25th annual expo in June of this year, and Harmony is a regular exhibitor. Harmony is also an Impact Partner Grant recipient that is offered by the Office of Strategy and Innovation. And then the LGBT Center received a $25,000 building upfit grant that our Housing and Neighborhood Department actually manages and oversees that program. I'll talk a little bit more further down in the presentation about future plans for supporting the LGBTQIA+ business community. About the disparity study, I'm going to actually call Miller 3, Larry Scott, Mr. Larry Scott, to provide a brief recap of the disparity study. Larry.
Thank you, Lakeisha. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of council. My name is Larry Scott. I serve as a senior consultant with Miller 3 Consulting. I'm joined by our CEO, Mr. Dave Miller, and we were afforded the opportunity to execute your disparity study. I'll have my brief comments as a recap of the disparity study effort as a precursor to the coming post-disparity study discussion. A disparity study provides an entity with the required factual predicate to the extent that that entity is seeking to engage in ethnicity and gender conscious efforts along with their regular efforts when engaging the community. It examines whether or not an entity has purposefully or passively allowed procurement activities that impact the awarding of contracts to ready, willing, and able minority and women-owned business enterprises. Disparity studies usually occur between a 3-year to 5-year window. In the case of the Raleigh disparity study, we looked at your contracting opportunities or activity over a 5-year period for your operating year of FY17 through FY21. And the goal of the study is to identify any barriers or obstacles that may be preventing certain groups from having a full and equal opportunity to engage in your contracting opportunities and develop strategies to promote greater diversity and inclusion. We completed that body of work, presented to the City Council, and it was adopted around April of 2023. The intent of the disparity study was to assess the current processes and programs that Raleigh utilizes and look for opportunities to improve existing programs as it relates to contracting with your community, including minority women business enterprises. It's important to note that our study focused on the city's awarded contracts for goods, services, and construction. I want to note here that when we looked at those, we were considering commercial spend. What that means is that your emergency, sole source, special procurements, pensions, and things that we would categorize as non-commercial spend were not considered as part of the review. In terms of the findings looked at areas for improvement in contracting, including your minority and women-owned business opportunities. It looked at your procurement operations, your current outreach efforts, how you capture your data, monitoring, and any external partnerships with MFTA providers. By MFTA providers, I'm referring to any entities that provide managerial, financial, or technical assistance to your vendor community. The findings were of a qualitative and quantitative nature, and we segmented the findings around your procurement categories, which are A&E design services, construction services, what we refer to as professional and non-professional services, but Raleigh collectively refers to as your general services, and then goods and supplies. To the extent that we did that body of work and shared those findings, we developed a ready, willing, and able availability goals table that was provided to the City of Raleigh as part of the post-study activity. And at this point, I'll turn the floor back over to Keisha, and she'll share more information about the post-study activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. All right, so next we're going to provide a quick summary of the key actions and progress for 2024. First up is just looking at some of the key actions from January to August. So as mentioned, we selected and contracted a post-study consultant, so Miller 3, which you just heard from. We also worked to collaborate and develop the 2-year implementation strategy, which you'll hear more about in just a few seconds. Created essential goal-setting tools. One of the tools that Larry mentioned was the availability chart, and so that was worked on as well. Held bi-weekly meetings and updates with key stakeholders, conducted benchmarking for program improvement. So city staff actually did some soft benchmarking early part of the year. And so as a part of this project, the consultants focused on doing more extensive benchmarking, which will yield a benchmarking report that we will be able to reference as well. We engaged the executive committee for feedback and improvement. So there's ongoing conversations and meetings with the executive committee to talk through the progress of the project and request guidance and feedback as needed as well. Some of the engagement and implementation that's happened from September through December was the launch of the MWBE dashboard and My Procurement Dashboard for Supply Insights. And so the dashboard is going to be instrumental for internal staff, end users, as far as the departments when they're going to make a purchasing decision. They'll be able to access the dashboard where firms will be marked as Hub or DBE certified. So excited about that development and being able to deploy that dashboard. There was a announcement in the loop related to that dashboard, and we hope to provide more training and conversation around the use of that dashboard in the days ahead. Establish the MWBE collaboration team and confirm department contacts. So we've had a long-standing MWBE work group since probably about 2018, but we saw a need to repurpose that group and center that group's focus around some of the implementation strategies. We did some work to identify key point of contacts within our big four departments or our core departments, which are Raleigh Water, Parks and Recreation, Engineering, and Transportation. So this group will support us in some of the strategy related to the implementation. One of the first things that we asked for support around was project forecasting. One of the recommendations that came back as a part of the disparity study recommendations was to get project forecasting information. And so we worked extensively throughout the month of October, and we held roughly about 11 meetings across those four departments that I just mentioned to share with the departments about the data that we're looking for related to project forecasting. So that would provide us with the scope of the project, timeline for the solicitation to hit EVP, if there are any special requirements, and et cetera. The goal of getting this data is to be able to provide this information to the general public, but also more strategically use it to engage with the MWBE business community. And so one of the things that we heard back from the anecdotal portion of the disparity study was that firms felt that they didn't have a good understanding of what the opportunities were that exist within the city. So we want to work to reduce that barrier and be able to provide some advanced notification of contracting opportunities with the city. Last but not least, we worked to onboard a community engagement specialist and began to draft engagement strategies. Super excited that we have our very first engagement specialist dedicated to the work of the MWBE program. This is going to be a brand new arm of work for us, but it is critical. Back to what I mentioned related to helping the community to understand the opportunities that exist, but we also need to have a good understanding of those firms in our market who are ready, willing, and available to do work with the city. And so being able to bridge and make that connectivity between understanding of the firms in our market and what the opportunities are that exist within the city. So we're super excited about that, to have a new community engagement specialist position. In 2024, we also worked to expand our community engagement efforts. So we presented a series of events. In 2024, we'll continue to build on that in the coming year. A Raleigh business owner did provide a quote related to some of the felt impact around some of the expanded community engagement efforts. So I wanted to take the time to share that with you today. Working along the city for as long as I have, I can say you all have taken the MWBE program to the next level. Rose painting has been forever blessed by the city, and we'll spend our lives paying it forward as often as we can. We have recently teamed up with an MWBE-owned business who does line stripping. We feel blessed to help him build and grow his business. It is through efforts like last night that has given all of us who wouldn't have a seat at the table without you, our Raleigh business owner. Now to move into the two-year implementation strategy. There are 5 key priority areas that I will discuss briefly related to the two-year implementation strategy. So the full document along with the project timeline has been provided as a part of the backup material as well. So the first up is establishing race and gender conscious goals to be applied across procurement types. As I mentioned earlier, currently the city has an aspirational goal centered around our construction and repair contracts of $300,000 and above, or $100,000 or more that includes any state funding. So looking at establishing new policy that enables race and gender conscious goals across procurement types, starting with the construction contracts in year 1. Wanted to note the annual goal for construction and repair repair contracts may differ from the existing 15% goal depending on the statistical data and the availability chart that was mentioned earlier. That being said, any annual goals for construction and repair contracts that are different from the 10% that is referenced in General Statute 143-128.2 will require notice and a public hearing before council. So we'll provide more information in the new year once we have a chance to create and draft out new policies related to that. There's also been discussion amongst the Policy and Goal Committee related to the utilization of project-specific goals for our construction and repair contracts of $300,000 and above. And so one of the things that we did early on was to create working committees centered around implementing the disparity study recommendations. So we do have a goal and policy committee. We also have a data committee, and then we're leveraging the procurement advisory committee as well to support some of this work. So the policy and goal folks will lead a lot of the conversations around what our expanded goals will look like. And you have representation from the city core departments that I mentioned earlier, the city attorney's office, procurement, as well as MWBE and DEI serving on those working committees. Year two, we hope to expand this approach to include some of the non-construction procurement types. So we talked about professional services, general services, as well as our goods and supplies, and looking at this phased approach of starting with construction in year one, and then in year two, moving to some of the non-construction procurement types. Enhancing the MWBE program administration and operations. We've actually already started to move the needle on some of these activities that are not heavily centered in policy. And so the top priority right now is really to move forward in policy creation around our race and gender conscious efforts as far as where we want to expand those goals, looking at some of the race and gender neutral initiatives that we can deploy, creating policy around those initiatives as well. Project forecasting, I mentioned that earlier. That's going to be really critical for the work in advancing the administration of the program. And then I'll also mention the contract compliance. So we do have good faith efforts that's currently tied to our aspirational goal that's centered around our construction and repair contracts of $300,000 and above. In this first year, we want to focus on strengthening those efforts that currently exist, but then also looking at compliance efforts that will be centered around some of the new initiatives that we will deploy as a result of new and updated policy. And you can see some of the other activities that we plan to undertake as a part of enhancing the MWBE program. Enhancing race and gender neutral initiatives. So race and gender neutral strategies to be employed alongside our race and gender conscious efforts. So this is an opportunity for the Policy and Goal Committee to review the city's race and gender neutral programs and to find programming that will work for a small business in general. Whether you fall in if you fall in one of these categories, race aside, you could be a small business, a local business, a disadvantaged business, a veteran-owned or disabled business, or the LGBTQ plus community ownership as far as the business. So the race neutral will kind of look at where we are as a city, and maybe there's certain certain contract amounts as far as dollar thresholds where we can deploy some strategies related to our race and gender neutral initiatives. Enhancing data collection and management, and so working with the data committee to have conversations around assessing our current systems and where there may be some gaps, being able to identify those gaps and make recommendations as to enhancements to our current systems, or is there an opportunity for the city to institute other software and technology to help us advance our data collection and tracking efforts. Proposed procurement systems and culture changes. So considering shift in focus from programmatic, so MWBE compliance, to organizational, a commitment to this creating this inclusive procurement environment. So we take it from where this is a priority for the 5 folks who, are working in the MWBE program to creating this environment of procurement inclusivity where this is a priority across the organization. So we'll be working again with the Procurement Advisory Committee to help us to support some of the strategies related to that, but also implementing training and development. That's going to be critical to training around the new developed policies and et cetera related to advancing this work. I wanted to share a quick little summary of the project timeline. Again, you do have a detailed project table in your backup documentation, but months 1 through 3 in year 1 focuses on the program assessment. So reviewing the organization's history, the MWBE program and key documents, benchmarking, as I mentioned, doing some more extensive benchmarking and providing a benchmarking report as a part of this project. Also developing actionable plans and frameworks that's going to actually support the overall implementation effort. There is a planning and implementation effort, so the consultant will continue to provide technical assistance and project management throughout the life of the project. The consultant would also assist in drafting some of the policy document and program monitoring frameworks, developing a budget plan, and offer guidance on report recommendations as well. And then the last area, but certainly not least, monitoring and goal refinement. So we talked about creating new policies, implementing expanded goals. So looking at in year 2, assessing if there are any recommended changes to our procurement practices. Are there any opportunities to refine our MWBE goals, implement monitoring systems as well as performance assessments, and then lastly, celebrate successes with recognition events as well. Next steps, so our top focus now is going to be to create policy, really focus in on over the next couple of months, getting those policies created, getting those policies approved, creating the training and providing the training around those new and updated policies, and being able to implement some of those expanded goals in the immediate future. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm definitely happy to answer any questions that you all have at this time.
Thank you. What questions do we have? Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, thank you for this. Couple questions I've got. One is that I'm thinking back to this Hispanic Entrepreneurs Roundtable that a handful of us attended. And one thing that I remember taking away from one of the small group conversations is that there are some barriers, or like what the resident felt like were artificial barriers in some of the hub certification processes. So for instance, I guess you must be a citizen of the United States, not some other, like someone else still doing business legally, but a non-citizen. And I'm curious if how the results of those roundtables have been folded into any of your discussions, and then also if the city has any role in kind of massaging out or conveying up the chain some of those barriers for future adjustment.
Fantastic question, and MWBE staff has been involved in some of those roundtable conversations, and so we've actually talked through some strategies to support specifically the Hispanic business community related to that. One of the things that I didn't mention, you saw on one of the slides, was the certification assistance. We do provide technical support ongoing. So currently we are providing quarterly workshops around the hub and DBE certification programs. What we intend to deploy at the early part of the year is creating that same workshop in Spanish. So this will be actually catering to the Hispanic business community. We're partnering with HCACs and other support agencies that actually have connection with the Hispanic business community. The other thing that we're actually going to do is provide a technical assistance workshop. So we'll start doing those quarterly as well. We're moving away from just providing the information, but we're going to invite probably about 20 firms per session to the Pathway Center to utilize the computer lab, where they can come in and actually understand these are the requirements for the application, these are the documents needed, actually come prepared and actually use the computers to register via EVP and actually work through that certification process. So we'll actually have hub staff on hand to partner with us to work through some of that. And so we've actually had a recent conversation also with other organizations like the Women's Business Center, SCORE. So we hope to do a lot more partnership with them going forward around some workshop development, as well as some of these technical assistance components that we can partner with some of those subject matter experts.
Great. Yeah, awesome. That sounds great.
Any other questions? Councilmember Jones?
Thank you so much. I have a few, but I was wondering about the stakeholders that were, the committees that were either formed or to be formed? Because I think, are there both? Like, we have formed a stakeholder committee, and I thought I read that we were forming, or am I misunderstanding?
So you are correct. We have formed, so the Goal and Policy Committee as well as the Data Committee. And then the Procurement Advisory Committee was reactivated, kind of PAC 2.0 that procurement actually leads. So these committees are actually already formed. Now we have to continue the conversation with these committees centered around next steps of policy creation. So that's actually where we're going next, is to actually start having some of the deeper conversations around the policy.
Great, thank you. And how were they chosen? Are they staff members only? Who are the stakeholders?
That's a good question. So staff members only, so representation from the 4 core departments that I mentioned earlier, the city attorney's office, procurement as well, procurement and finance, and then DEI. So they were chosen by working the executive committee. The executive committee is department directors, as well as the city manager's office and city attorney's office. So we brought our recommendations as an MWBE team to the executive committee. We had some conversations around, maybe this person might be a best fit, et cetera. So there was some dialogue around that, and then ultimately the executive committee kind of signed off on the final membership. So it is all internal and no current external membership. Right
now, with all the work, thank you so much.
Sure.
With all the work that you guys are going to be embarking on to make sure that this is implemented, do you feel that there is a needed additional staffing that you already have? Are you guys good on staffing and taking on this chunk of work?
Well, I think that will be part of the assessment. One of the key roles, because one of the gaps that I identified was community engagement, and then from a data analysis standpoint of being able to manage through kind of getting us to a more efficient data collection and management process, but also the narrative piece I think is going to be really important in the future. So thanks to the fiscal year 25 budget, we have filled the community engagement role, but I still see, and as the scope, we continue to define the scope based on this new work, there may be a need for additional capacity, and that's one of the things as a part of the budget conversations that we're working towards, even for fiscal year 26 budget, to understand what are those additional needs from a capacity standpoint and be able to represent that as a part of future budget processes.
Awesome.
Yes.
I would just add really briefly that part of the activities we're doing under the post study is taking a look at your data capture mechanisms. And to the extent that we can identify areas where you can leverage your existing systems that may lessen the burden as it relates to human resources, but there may also be a byproduct of our analysis that looking at other tools that can be brought to bear to assist with the effort that's necessary to do post-contract award monitoring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Good point, because a lot of the data collection and processes are very manual right now. So to Larry's point, if we can get to a better place from a data collection standpoint, whether that's leveraging existing systems and building out some of those modules, or whether we use a third-party system, is going to help us create more efficiency.
Great. And then my last question, I was reading towards the end of it, and you mentioned a culture audit survey, and I don't know what that is, and I was wondering if you could explain that.
Yes, and I'll actually allow Larry to further define, and that's something that's to be determined amongst the executive committee if that's the direction the city would like to take, but that was one of the recommendations.
Good morning, everyone. Dave Miller. Actually, a really good question. One of the things that we try to assess is whether or not the organization itself is ripe for any of these potential changes. It is difficult to enact some of these implementation and changes when the organization itself is either immersed in current practices and less receptive to making some adjustments. And so the culture audit was to help us to understand where the organization was, understand where leadership is, and it evaluates from top-down approach. But the loudest voice in this process are those who are actually effectuating the programs itself. And so we look at it from bottom up, but we consider every level of the organization inside of it.
Great. And was that a recommendation, or is that something that you already did?
It was a part of a recommendation, and I think it was something that we might have tabled given where the city of Raleigh is, but we're more than happy to sort of breathe more life back into that.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Councilmember Branch?
I just asked maybe in the 3-4 month time frame if we can just get a status update, even if it's in the manager's report or something, of where we are, so that we're still keeping this in the forefront of what we're doing, and the community sees that we're still being intentional. And as we're moving forward. And the only other thing is making sure our prime stakeholders are aware of opportunities. So the more they do on the forefront now, the easier it will be, I think, later.
Thank you, and good point about keeping the community abreast. One of the things I've been working with communications around is keeping the website, updated and keeping the community acclimated as to where we are in the timeline. So next steps, we've already had a conversation with communication staff, is to update our project page that will give the community a sense of what the overall project timeline looks like and be able to provide some status. So thank you for that.
Councilmember Black?
Hi. Can you go back a couple slides?
Sure.
Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. I think it's this one.
Okay.
Okay, so I had some questions about this. I thought it was really poignant, specifically because what I have learned is that there's a lot of things that they're asking us to hold, specifically as it relates to undoing systemic oppression through programmatic work, and that can't happen. Like, it has to be something that truly is internal to the organizational structure. So I had questions about like how this would process from shifting from programmatic to looking at organizational stuff. And I know you have those two things listed, but I wondered if you could go into more detail because I was really curious about that.
Sure, it's really gets to behavior change, right? And a lot of that is gonna happen with, training, right? And really exposure and having these conversations up close and personal, with our departments, those buyers who are making the purchasing decisions. So helping, end users to understand the why, number one, because a lot of times, folks need to understand the why to really be able to get behind the support. Understand the why. Having policy is gonna be critical because, right now, even looking at the policy that we have, that drives a lot of what we do, which is the focus is heavily on construction of 300,000 and above. There's no policy that exists anywhere else. So policy is gonna be instrumental in helping us really support that behavior change, right? Obviously, the continued support from leadership and council just to cultivate that buy-in across the organization and being able to vocalize that this is an organization-wide priority. But yes, training and development, I think for us, being able to develop effective, comprehensive training along the way as we have these new policies and et cetera, but it's really gonna take those up close and personal conversations and along the way as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
It did. And so those policy points are going to be things that come back to this council or to the council?
Yes. So we'll be updating council as we, because some of these are really going to, I know that per the city manager's office, we'll take it through the governing board as far as the approval process, but we'll be bringing updates probably in the early part of the year as we have some of these defined and drafted out.
And so for the people that are going to be coming back in December, what are the ways that they can continue to support from the council level, the things that you're talking about as far as like making sure it's a priority and that's well-versed and verbalized across the organization?
So I think really just continuing to support and keep this as a high priority, right, for council is important for us. I'm starting to see us, show up, in the budget as well, new positions, the resources as well. I think that's really going to be critical for us. A lot of, a pretty good bit of our challenges center around data collection. So if there's any support that you all can offer as far around technology and being able to get some movement from a technology standpoint, because I do feel like we spend a lot of time, conversing on, trying to navigate our current systems, but really being able to push that forward. Because if we can get efficient, data collection and systems in place, we could really be able to tell, because the city is really doing great, even on some of the contracts that we don't currently have structured participation goals, firms are being utilized, but we need to get to a place where we're consistently being able to track that story. So continue to champion us, continue to support the request for resources on the human capital side, as well as monetary, budgetary side to support some of the resources as a part of this project.
Something you said brought up another question, and I'm going to finish because I know we have a very long day today and we want to break before our council meeting starts in an hour. So you mentioned technology.
Yes.
Is that something that you're going to be uplifting towards us? Like, we want these things? Will it come back in the timeline of events, or is it just something that's internal that could happen?
So it will be a part of the budget process, so I would imagine that will come back before council, because that's one of the planning that we're doing to tie back to the budget cycle. If we need upgrades to PeopleSoft, if we need a third-party, tracking system, this is the cost associated with it, and lifting this up is a part of the budget process.
Cool. It's great to see this moving. I remember the last time you came, you kind of talked about, and I know we're doing more now, but I thought it was a little bit abysmal, and I'm glad that we are doing more. And it's good to see. So
Awesome.
nice
Thank
to see you again.
you.
And your hair looks really nice.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Any other
Anything else
questions?
from the table? Well, I will just add, I appreciate you highlighting some of the LGBTQ partnership opportunities. I understand that that's not one of the hub certified categories, but I do think it's important that we continue to do that work. So I appreciate that. And I'm really optimistic about this initiative moving forward. So thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If we've got nothing else from the table, all right, we will be adjourned to 1 p.m. Thank you.